Don't move. I was lounging in the armchair at the end of my day, watching the nightly news like I usually do. The fireplace in the old rickety place cast a warm glow across the room, challenging the cold blue of the grainy television. The beer bottle I'd been sipping on had sat empty by my side for the past 30 minutes. I was too damn lazy to get up and grab another, and yet I couldn't help stealing longing glances over and over at the empty bottle. Ferocious dilemma. One that suited the somber, pitiful state of my life. The TV flickered again, making that sudden thrashing sound old sets are wont to do. And the old clock on the wall kept ticking with each passing sound. I grabbed my phone off the armrest, hoping hopelessly for a message that I knew wasn't coming. Again, there was nothing. Nothing but the last text from my wife 3 days prior, telling me sternly not to bother coming home, and to instead spend a while at the family cabin. Things had been rough between us for a while, what with my drinking and being away as often as I was for work. Even when I'd get home after a business trip, I'd be too tired and too stressed to be a proper husband. And I suppose she's had it with all that. So she decided it was best we took some time apart. And so here I was, alone, and somewhat confused at how I ended up here in the woods at a time when hardly anyone was on vacation. The TV flickered again, seemingly louder this time, and the old clock kept ticking, its gentle sound somehow rising above the murmur of the nightly news. And then my phone went off. It was the sweetest sound in the world, to hear it after 3 days of radio silence. I didn't have many friends, so I knew who it had to be, though I was surprised she was up so late as it was midnight. I quickly reached over again and opened my messages. To my disappointment, it wasn't my wife. It was some odd number I'd never seen. I opened the message and was met by 2 bold words. Don't move. I instinctively looked over my shoulder at the shadowed kitchen and staircase behind me. A brief moment passed before a stupid grin broke out on my face. I had gotten some kind of spam text message and actually let it spook me for a second. A few too many drinks, I supposed. There was, of course, nothing out of the ordinary in the cabin. Outside in the woods, things were even quieter, and the only thing I'd ever seen out there was the odd doe. Years ago, the estranged uncle I'd inherited the cabin from had talked about the place being tainted somehow, but none of us really took him seriously. He was always an odd one and wasn't on good terms with most of us. I turned back to the TV for a while before deciding to call it a night. The TV flickered as I shut it off, and all that remained was the sound of the old clock's ticking. I awoke the next morning, stiff in the cold. The fire had gone out partway through the night, and I'd forgotten to add to it. I put on my slippers and groaned my way down to the kitchen, joints aching and creaking. It was a brisk morning, and a thick layer of snow had settled outside. I started brewing a pot of coffee before reigniting the fireplace. Coffee always came first. Once I'd warmed up by the fire and finished my coffee, I decided to go for a walk. I'd always loved snowy mornings, chilly as they were. I also thought I'd take a photo or two on my phone to post online. Who knows, maybe my wife would see the post and loosen up a bit. She still hadn't responded to any of my calls or messages since the beginning of my exile. Unfortunately for me, it was colder than I'd thought. That kind of cold that shoots through your layers and chills you to the bone. I just snapped a quick picture of the snow-covered roadway leading away from the cabin before heading back in. The trees lining the road were glistening in the morning sun. It was a great shot, I thought. My phone went off again as soon as I stepped back into the cabin. Much to my dismay, it was another odd number I'd never seen. You did this. This time I was just annoyed. Could these ridiculous messages stop getting my hopes up? I paid it no mind and settled back into my armchair. It was time to get started on my paperwork, but not before uploading that photo right quick. As I pulled up the picture on my phone, I noticed something strange. There was some sort of crimson stain in the snow right near the base of the front porch. I hadn't noticed anything when I was out there initially, though this thing seemed hard to miss. It just didn't look right. It was too vibrant against the snow. I stepped back out to take a look. When I saw the bright red stain, I immediately assumed it was a rabbit carcass or some such. The poor thing had probably become the meal of some predator the night before. But as I brushed aside the snow and saw what it had concealed, I gasped and toppled back right onto my ass. After I'd regained my composure and brushed the snow off my backside, I reached forward and begrudgingly lifted the thing off the ground. It was a finger, and as far as I could tell, a human finger. It was missing most of its skin, so it was hard to be sure. A tiny little thing, but the amount of blood around it was disturbing. Why the hell was I finding this here? Did an injured hiker come by last night in search of help? I'd always been a deep sleeper, so I could easily have missed something like that. Or perhaps it wasn't a human finger, but instead belonged to some poor animal. Naturally, I found it unsettling that I had discovered something so strange immediately after receiving an equally odd text message. But I wasn't about to start jumping to ridiculous conclusions. It was a coincidence, and neither the silly message nor the poor sod that lost his finger were a concern of mine. I had work to do, so I tossed the thing back into the snow, opting to let nature run its course, and settled back inside. I ended up posting the photo anyways, and much to my pleasure, nobody seemed to notice the anomaly. My brother and a couple of my work colleagues commented, expressing jealousy at my impromptu vacation. Most importantly, my wife hit the like button on the picture. She wasn't ready to talk yet, but she couldn't help but appreciate my post. Progress was being made. After an otherwise uneventful day of getting paperwork done, I settled down in the living room with a few beers. I watched a couple movies before tossing on the news like usual to round out the night. It was at midnight that I once again heard my phone go off. I fumbled to pull my phone out of my pocket. I opened up the message. Don't move. I admit that this time I felt a chill run up my spine when I read those words. I knew it was some sort of silly spam message and that it wasn't worth my time, but some part of me felt inclined to listen to the message. I set my phone down and sat still with my eyes on the TV. The TV flickered again. The old clock on the wall ticked away. And suddenly I heard some sort of tumbling sound above me, somewhere upstairs. I assured myself that it was probably a loose object in the closet falling over, or maybe some sort of critter that had managed to get into the cabin. Still, I didn't move. My thoughts were racing, but my eyes were fixed on the TV in front of me, and I wasn't moving. Then I heard the rhythmic thumping of footsteps. Not natural, steady footsteps, but erratic footsteps, like what you'd expect to hear if someone above you was struggling to walk with a broken ankle. My eyes grew wide, and the hairs on my body stood on end. The TV flickered again. The soft murmur of the news had melted into meaningless gibberish in my mind. The clock's ticking was louder than ever, and the footsteps above me creeped towards the staircase, which was behind me and out of sight. All I could see while sitting in the armchair was the TV in front of me, the fireplace to my left, and the clock on the wall to my right. It was a small nook of a room, with the rest of the cabin behind me. Unable to see what was happening, and hearing the skittish footsteps reach the top of the stairs, I decided I was done with the whole not moving thing. I darted up and spun to face the shadowy kitchen and staircase. I couldn't see or hear anything, so I took a deep breath and walked towards the stairs. I flipped the light switch and stood prepared to deal with whoever or whatever had broken into my house. But there was nothing there. The staircase was empty, and nothing was at the top of it. I went upstairs and looked around. I checked the washroom, the bedroom, and inspected the bedroom closet. It was a compact and cozy cabin with few rooms, so it would have been easy to notice if something was awry. But everything was in its place. Nothing had fallen over, nothing seemed disturbed. Ultimately, I chalked it up to being a mouse or raccoon that somehow got inside and then left the same way it came. Honestly felt a bit ridiculous for getting spooked the way I had over something trivial. Thankfully, there wasn't anyone with me to witness the incident. I'd never have heard the end of it. I tidied up for the night and settled into bed. As I switched off the bedside lamp and sunk into my pillow, I thought of my wife, and felt grateful that I at least got something from her that day. I felt better because of that than I had the entire time since being kicked out. I drifted off with the tranquil sounds of the forest dancing in my ears, comfortable and at peace. My phone went off in the morning while I was still in bed. I squinted at it and saw that the number was, once again, one that I didn't recognize. My heart began to race as I recalled the previous night's events, and started to wonder what this new message might be. I opened my phone to look. You did this. My eyes flashed around the room for a moment. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and the window was curtained. I started to wonder what these messages could mean. If maybe they weren't just unwanted spam. Was someone pranking me? The bed creaked something fierce as I sat up and got dressed. I didn't want to take the messages too seriously, but I felt compelled to at least take a look around outside. I descended the stairs into the kitchen and completely froze at the bottom step, looking over at the counter. I couldn't tell what I was looking at. My stomach turned as my eyes slowly scanned the meaty object on the countertop. There was a lot of blood, enough that it was audibly dripping off the counter. Chunks of flesh were missing, and I could see bits of bone showing beneath the tissue. I swallowed stiffly as I realized what it was I was looking at. A bloody, mutilated leg was sitting on the counter, and it was more than likely a human leg. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My eyes were stuck on the revolting sight before me as my mind and heart raced. I thought back to the message I'd received. You did this. I'd written off the incident with the finger the previous day, but this time there was no mistaking it. Something profoundly wrong was happening here. I stumbled backwards, making all too much noise as I scrambled back up the stairs. I thumped my way into the bedroom and threw myself inside the closet before sliding the closet door shut. I barely fit in there, but there wasn't any better place to hide, and I was absolutely terrified. I tried to quiet my shaky breathing as I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The previous message seemed to glare right through me. You did this. First the finger and now an entire leg. And the leg was inside the cabin. Someone had broken in and placed that there. I considered that maybe the body parts were prosthetics. Perhaps some elaborate prank was being taken way too far, and I was the butt of the joke. In any case, I was not going to sit around and just let it go on. I needed to get out of there. After a solid 30 minutes of quietly hiding in the closet, I had built up the courage to set out. I hadn't heard a single sound throughout the house other than the ticking of the clock downstairs and the dripping of blood off the countertop. I left the bedroom and slowly, cautiously made my way down the stairs. I frantically looked around the kitchen and living room. I tried not to fixate on the leg. I ducked past each window and peeked outside, searching for any sign of whoever it was that was toying with me. There was nothing out of the ordinary. But then I was in the woods, where it would be all too easy for someone to hide. My truck was parked in front of the cabin off to the side of the road. I decided it was time to leave. I started towards the front door when my phone went off again. I gingerly pulled it out of my pocket, my hand trembling as I looked at the message. Don't leave. Some cold, carnal instinct in me felt obliged to listen to the message. I quickly dismissed that feeling and blasted out of the front door, sprinting to my truck. I got in, slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned the key. Nothing happened. I twisted the ignition back and forth in a panic, but my truck wasn't responding in the slightest. I lifted my head and frantically swiveled around, trying to get a look at something, anything that might explain what was happening to me. Then my phone went off again. You did this. Not again, I thought. Not again. Through the terror and the disgust I'd been feeling, I had started to feel something even worse. Guilt. When I considered that the body parts in and around my home could be real, it naturally had started to sink in that those body parts belonged to someone. Someone was paying the price for my transgressions against whoever or whatever was making demands of me. I looked back at the cabin. The front door was open. I couldn't remember if I had left it open, though. As I contemplated my next move, the guilt kept building. Was someone, possibly a stray hiker or camper, being tortured and murdered as part of some sick game that I had been roped into? If so, could I live with myself if I were to continue disobeying the messages? I quickly realized that, in any case, there was no way for me to leave. The distance I'd have to cover on foot was insurmountable, especially with the recent snow. It was also bitterly cold out, and I felt exposed. I figured my best option was to head back into the cabin to regroup before contacting my wife or my brother in hopes of being picked up. My knees shook pitifully as I plodded back towards the cabin. I knew I was being watched at this point, and the knowledge left me feeling vulnerable in a way that made my stomach turn. When I neared the cabin and saw that there was a blood trail leading inside from the front porch, my stomach turned again, and I lurched forward, vomiting into the snow. I wiped my face with my sleeve before stepping back into the cabin. The blood trail led to the back side of my armchair in the living room, where a human arm was placed vertically, resting against the chair as though it had been neatly placed there. The arm was missing one finger, but was otherwise intact. It was cut, or torn, rather, just below the shoulder. Tissue dangled from the stump. It looked as though it had been ripped off with tremendous force. I glanced from the arm back over to the leg on my countertop before throwing up again. Once I'd expunged what little bile was left in my stomach, I tried to collect myself. I couldn't stand the sight, the smell, or the dripping sounds of the horrors any longer. I decided that I simply had to toss the body parts outside before washing up and trying to get in touch with someone. As I carried out my godforsaken task, I couldn't help but notice how utterly real the body parts seemed. If this was some elaborate prank, the pranksters were experts. But as that deep chill rose within me again, I felt that this was no prank, and that these were no props. Once I was done, I texted my wife, then my brother. I didn't want to go into too much detail at that point, so I just explained to them that I wasn't feeling well and really needed a ride back into the city. I waited a minute before my phone went off twice in quick succession. Message failed to send. Please try again later. My heart sank again. My truck was somehow disabled and my phone wasn't working. I tried calling instead of text messaging, but was met with a similar error. My internet connection was entirely out as well. I suspected immediately that this was all a part of the sick game I was stuck in. I was scared. I was alone. I didn't know what to do. The words, "Don't leave," echoed in my mind. The guilt continued to build, and that carnal instinct remained. Something deep inside me told that I needed to listen to the commands I was receiving. I lost track of time as I paced back and forth, fraught with worry and too anxious to sit still. None of the subsequent text messages or calls I tried to send successfully went through. I had tried my wife and brother several times, and even resorted to trying a few co-workers and family friends. No luck whatsoever. All my communications were blocked. Once I finally broke out of the panicked prison of my mind, I realized that the sun had set and saw that everything outside was nearly pitch black. I frantically started closing every curtain in the cabin. Unfortunately, as soon as I'd regained some sense of safety and privacy, something awful happened. All at once, the power in the cabin went out. I was standing in absolute darkness. In that moment, I felt terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my life. All I could hear was my racing heartbeat, my labored breath, and the ever-vigilant ticking of the old clock on the wall. When the TV suddenly turned on, I damn near jumped out of my skin. It was an older set, so the blue light didn't light up the cabin all too well. All I could see was the outline of my armchair and the rug on the living room floor. The lights had not come back on, yet, sure as day, the TV was on. And before the power had gone out, I was certain I wasn't watching TV. Hell, I hadn't touched the remote since the previous day with the things I've been through since. My phone went off again. I knew this time that this wasn't going to be a message from my wife or my brother, or anyone else that I'd have been so very happy to talk to. I slowly looked at the new message. Sit down. It was nearly without hesitation that I listened to the command. I felt as though part of me had decided hours earlier that I wasn't going to disobey anymore. I sat in the armchair and fixed my eyes on the TV. It flickered loudly, interrupting the news anchor as it was wont to do. And the clock on the wall kept ticking away, seemingly louder than any clock had any right to tick. My phone went off again. I had it at the ready this time. I knew this was coming. Don't move. Despite my terror, I felt resigned at that point. I was mortified but defeated, and that cold feeling in me begged me not to move. So I sat there, eyes fixed on the TV, breathing as steadily as I was able. I resolved not to move, even as a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Then I heard thumping upstairs. It was louder this time than it had been previously. The previous day's thought that the sound might be a raccoon or a mouse seemed miles away. The skittish, deranged footsteps broke out above me, just like last time, but this time they were quicker, angrier. The TV flickered and the damn clock's ticking somehow rivaled even the sound of the frantic footsteps above me. As the footsteps reached the top of the staircase, I noticed I was shaking. I tried to steady my breathing and hold still as best I could. Whatever it was at the top of the stairs began to descend, seemingly stumbling and stamping on each step. It slowed as it neared the bottom of the staircase. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I thought I might literally die of fear. Just then the TV flickered violently before breaking out into raw static and white noise. It ruthlessly shattered the relative silence of the cabin. The clock's ticking grew so loud in my ears that it began to hurt, and I started to feel as though the air in the cabin was rushing. The air was tugging on the organs in my body, making them feel out of place. The pressure was nauseating. I heard a loud crash behind me and the TV grew louder. The clock wouldn't stop ticking. The air kept rushing. I noticed tears trickling down from my wide, horrified eyes. The angry footsteps that had subsided for a moment suddenly broke into a frantic, scampering run. I heard them cover the distance from the staircase to the back of my chair in less than a second. At the same time, I heard an awful, monotone, croaking voice grow nearer. Yes, 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 yes. I cried out in horror and leapt out of the chair. I was gasping and howling as I violently spun and threw my arms out in hopes of defending myself. But all at once, everything was normal. The lights were on. The news anchor on the TV was murmuring something about a new traffic law. The clock was ticking quietly. It wasn't as though things had returned to normal in an instant. No, it was as though nothing was wrong to begin with. There was nothing in the cabin with me. The power seemed fine on all the appliances and lights. It was like waking from a nightmare and realizing it was only a dream. Except it was not a dream. As much as I wish it had been, I was wide awake the entire time. Something or someone had been in the cabin with me. Something had affected the lights, the TV. My ears still rung from how loud it was all moments before, and I felt sick to my stomach from the way the rushing air had tugged on my guts. I fell onto my hands and knees and retched violently, but nothing came up. Once I'd finished gagging, I started to sob. I curled sideways into a ball on the rug and hugged myself as I cried, and without meaning to, I drifted to sleep. I awoke when my phone went off. For a brief, beautiful moment, I forgot where I was and what had been happening to me. Then a bitter feeling of emptiness settled firmly in my gut as I recalled the previous night's events. I felt wretched. The dampness around my waist told me that I had wet myself in my sleep. Every joint in my body ached. I just about started to cry again before collecting myself. As I reached for my phone on the bedside table, it occurred to me that something was not right. I didn't recall moving to the bedroom the previous night. Yet here I was, soaked and stinking, but comfortable, at least, in bed. The last thing I remembered from the previous night was sobbing while laying on the living room floor. Too tired to give it any more thought, I checked the message. You did this. In all my bewilderment, I had forgotten that this was coming. I had moved, after all. I'd given in to my terror and jumped out of the chair the night before, and for that there was always going to be a consequence. Somewhere downstairs or outside I was going to find something terrible. I closed my eyes and took a few deep breaths. I didn't have the courage to get up, to face what was down there. Not yet. I rolled over to try to get a little more rest. But my leg bumped into something solid and moist. I abruptly pulled away, scurrying off the opposite side of the bed. When I looked down on the sheets, I could see that I had not wet myself after all. The bed was soaked in crimson. The blood had stained my clothing as well. I was covered in it. I slowly pulled the sheets from the bed. I slowly uncovered the gory flesh under the covers, and I was devastated when I saw the extent of it. This was an entire mutilated torso, with one arm and one leg still attached to it. Feeling delirious at that point, I threw the covers back over the abomination and rushed downstairs. The curtains were open, and it was pitch black outside. I wasn't sure how long I had slept for, but it was clearly night, and I suspected I'd be getting another message soon enough. I decided then that it was time to see things through. I felt hollow, and my will was crushed. I would no longer defy the messages. I didn't have it in me to do so. If following through resulted in my gruesome death, then so be it, I thought. I was done. Whatever or whoever I was dealing with had me sorely outmatched. I was a helpless victim, and I didn't stand a chance of fighting back or escaping. The power throughout the cabin went out again. The darkness that consumed the place didn't feel natural. It was as though it reached inside me. The TV burst on with a loud series of flickers. The news anchor's murmurs sounded like total gibberish to me, like a preacher speaking in tongues. Like clockwork, my phone went off. Sit down. I sat down. It went off again. Don't move. I fixed my eyes on the TV across the living room and held still. Tears began to build in my eyes, but I did not tremble. I was more sad than scared. The thumping above me began. At the exact same time, the old clock's ticking rose from a soft click to a thundering boom, as if a large bass drum was being hammered right next to my head. I thought I felt blood trickling out of my ears, but I did not move. The scurrying footsteps were seething with rage this time. They crossed the floor above me at a deliberate pace. As they reached the top of the stairs, the TV flickered terribly before devolving into pure static and white noise. The sound inside of it was disturbing. I felt the static under my skin. It made me itchy. With each vile footfall down the staircase, I heard that awful croaking voice. Yes, 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 yes. The air in the room started to rush around me. The pressure was unbearable. My innards felt as though they would evacuate my body. The TV grew louder. It sounded less like static and more like the tortured howl of a mortally wounded man, and the clock's booming continued to deafen. Despite all of that, the sound of the entity behind me was crystal clear as it reached the bottom of the stairs. I braced myself for what I knew was coming, blinking away tears but remaining otherwise still, my eyes fixed firmly on the screaming TV set. With unnatural speed, the thing behind me scurried across the cabin, heading straight for the back of my armchair. Its croak turned into a stifled screech as it approached. Yes, 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 yes. I bit into my lip hard enough to flood my mouth with blood. I thought that I was likely going to die. I sunk my nails into the armrests of my chair hard enough to tear the fabric, but still I did not move. In an instant I felt an overwhelming rush move through my body. It was as though the entire cabin, no, the entire earth had lurched forward. And suddenly everything was normal. The lights were on, the fireplace was crackling to my left, the news anchor on the TV was interviewing an expert over some social issue, and the old clock on the wall was ticking peacefully. I sat still for hours, eyes fixed on the TV. The taste of iron in my mouth was making me ill, and the blood in my ears had become crusty. But I didn't feel compelled or ready to move, to do anything. Once there was sunlight shining through the curtains, I finally turned my head to look outside. I could hear the early spring birds singing. It was a beautiful day. My phone hadn't gone off. Hours had passed. Dawn had arrived, and still I hadn't received a message accosting me for defying previous demands. I suppose I had satisfied the entity that had been toying with me. When I did grab my phone, I noticed a couple old messages from my wife. It hadn't gone off, I was sure of that, but the messages were there unchecked nonetheless. She was simply asking me to come home. Tentatively the first time, then as more of a demand in the second message. A demand that I was all too happy to oblige. I needed to get out of there. Now. I gathered my things, changed into a fresh pair of clothes, and stepped outside. I gulped a few big breaths of fresh mountain air before starting towards my truck. Something told me it was going to work just fine now, and much to my pleasure, it started without a hitch. The 3-hour drive home left me plenty of time to think. I thought about everything that had happened over the previous week, the horrors I'd endured. I thought about how I'd probably need to speak with the police and somehow explain the grisly scene back at the cabin. But mostly I just felt empty. I didn't feel afraid, I didn't feel guilty, I didn't feel disgusted. I just felt hollow and broken. Like a damaged clock that's arm was jammed, doomed to forever tick in the same spot, never moving forward. Despite all of that, there was a warmth to finally seeing my apartment building loom in the distance after all I'd been through. I felt eager to try to start fresh with my wife and leave all the madness of the past week behind me. I wanted to just forget it all and get on with my life. The ascent up to the 20th floor took far longer than it rightfully should have. The elevator felt too small. It was agitating. I was relieved to step out once I'd arrived at my floor. I took another deep breath as I walked down the hall, shaking off the discomfort. I heard the din of our neighbors going about their lives. It was comforting to be in the city and around people again. Finally, I reached my suite. I unlocked the door and opened it. "I'm home," I said, grateful for the familiar aroma of my safe place. My wife was sitting on the dinner table, smiling at me. It was so nice to finally see her smile. There was just one thing that wasn't right. She was missing an arm. Oh, she was also missing a leg. In fact, she was missing most of her body. The only thing that was sitting on the tabletop was her smiling head, her grin reflecting off the pool of crimson beneath her. And that was Don't Move by MoeWanders. Man, another great little story by Mo. Man, it's crazy, right? So what would that entity have been when you really kind of like try to break it down? Because it's making me think of like, so it has a way to kind of trap you in, I suppose, your own bubble, right? This weird bubble, but it's not always, or is it? I don't know. Maybe it was kind of like the moment he entered because he wasn't able to really message anybody. I don't know, man. I really don't know. That's so fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And yet again, when it finally did reach him, something he could never see himself, what happened? You know? Did it enter him, possess him in some kind of a way? Is it now attached to him in some kind of form? I don't know. but obviously it still had the capability of actually being able to harm somebody. And the fact that it like tore up his wife and stuff, that's crazy, isn't it? Just just horrifying. Just horrifying. What a great little story. I really, really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. See you for the next one. Cheers, Mo. Thank you.